All right, let's go ahead and get right into it, guys. What you're looking at right here is a vacuum reservoir and check valve. This is a very common point of failure for the Ford E-Series van and cutaway from about 1996 until current day. And there's a couple of symptoms that you may experience whenever one or the other of these components fail or whenever they both fail together. In many cases, the AC will not blow out the front registers, even though the front registers are selected. The AC instead will blow out of the defrost vents. And in some cases, you may notice that the AC is blowing out the front registers, but whenever under heavy and consistent acceleration, you may notice that the flow of the air coming out of the front registers may wane and be diverted to the defrost vents. Usually, whenever these symptoms occur, you'll find that the vacuum reservoir has developed a crack in the side of it, allowing atmospheric pressure to be introduced into the vacuum system of the AC. Also, you might find that the vacuum check valve has failed, allowing air to flow in both directions. Of course, your AC system operates off of vacuum, and if vacuum is not able to be maintained or delivered to the AC control head, the AC will operate in default mode, which of course is air blowing out of the defrost vents. So what's the fix for this? Well, in my opinion, it would be best to go ahead and replace the vacuum reservoir and the check valve at the same time. Now, also there's this hose that goes between the check valve and the reservoir. They do tend to crack up and leak vacuum. So you may as well go ahead and replace that too while you're in there. So those three components, definitely replace. Of course, if you see anything else while you're in there, fix those things as well. So where do these parts live at, and how do you get to them to replace them in the first place? These parts are going to be located underneath your HVAC case on the inside of the engine compartment, just behind the battery, right about there. Very difficult to get to unless you actually remove the HVAC case. Actually, it's probably impossible to get to them unless you remove the HVAC case. Now, some people go about this repair differently than I do. I actually restore it to the way it was originally. I take the HVAC case out totally, and I get to the bottom side of it, and I replace the parts, and I put them back in the original locations. Now, I've heard that some people actually relocate this whole setup further up on the HVAC case. Now, you will at least have to take the HVAC case loose to gain access to the hoses back there, but theoretically, you can relocate this whole setup further up on the HVAC case, which will make it more easy for you to replace in the future. Now, you may be saying, that's a lot of work to do to be wrong. How do I know that these parts are actually bad? How do I diagnose this problem before I go through the trouble of having to take all that stuff out in order to replace these parts? Well, this is what I do. I first check for adequate vacuum going to the vacuum supply line for the check valve and the vacuum reservoir. And I do that under the hood in the engine compartment. There's a connector right here where two sides of the vacuum line can be disconnected from each other. One goes to the engine and the other one goes to the check valve. I make sure that I have at least 18 inches of mercury of vacuum from the engine going to that supply line to the check valve and the reservoir. So I'm checking vacuum on the engine side of the vacuum line with the engine running. If that checks out okay, I then reconnect the vacuum lines together. I shut the engine off, and then I go into the passenger compartment on the passenger side, and up underneath the glove box, just behind the glove box, you'll see that there are two vacuum lines that go up to a connector just behind the glove box. I disconnect that connector right there. Now, that connector may be a little difficult to disconnect. You got to do it one-handedly. You'll need to disengage the locking hook on the side of the connector in order to pull both halves of the connector apart to gain access to the vacuum ports inside. Once I have them disconnected, I then hook up a vacuum gauge to the port where the black line goes into that connector, or that side of the connector right there. This is the black line that comes through the firewall to the connector. So I hook up the vacuum gauge to it. I then go ahead and crank up the engine, and then I see what kind of vacuum I have available at that port with the engine running. Ideally, you should have engine vacuum there, so 18 inches of mercury or whatever vacuum that you had available at the connector up top where you checked for vacuum before. But the vacuum available should be right at or close to 18 inches of mercury. If you have low vacuum or no vacuum at all available there, then you have a vacuum leak between where you tested under the hood and where you're testing right now. Now, there is a vacuum supply line that goes from that connector where you tested for vacuum up underneath the hood to the check valve. So you want to check that as well. Sometimes you can have that line break. It's not very often, but you want to just check to make sure that the line's not broken going from where you check for vacuum under the hood to the check valve. So check that out. If that's okay, then you're going to have to take the HVAC case out and investigate a little further. Now say you do have adequate vacuum available where you're testing for vacuum behind the glove box. You'll also want to check the system's ability to maintain the vacuum. So in this case, what you'll need to do is turn the engine off. You should be able to maintain vacuum at that port with the engine not running. If you see a rapid drop in vacuum, then you probably have a bad check valve that's allowing atmospheric pressure to be introduced into the system, or you may have a crack in the vacuum reservoir. Either way, the problem now lies between where you're testing and the check valve. Now, don't forget to check the lines going from the connector to the firewall, guys. That can crack as well. It's unusual, but it can crack. And also outside on the other side of the firewall there where the check valve and the vacuum reservoir are, make sure you check all the lines going to those as well. Well, there you go, folks. More of an informational video rather than a step-by-step how-to video for you today. Sincerely hope that this helped. If you have any questions, please comment down below. Also, please read the entire description down below this video before you attempt this or apply any of this knowledge. There may be things I need to clarify, and that's where I do that, guys. So please read that, and also read the disclaimer at the very end of it. Thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe.